This is the Mooks and the Gripes podcast. Hello, everybody. This is Trevor with Healing in His Wings, Paul. Paul, how are you doing?
Wow. Now I feel a little underprepared. I'm doing good.
Oh no, do you not have healing in your wings today?
I don't know. I'll have to check. I'm not sure. It's still early. I haven't checked my wings yet, so.
Well, I'm expecting it today. I guess if you don't, boy, there are a lot of people I think who listen to the podcast for your healing influence. So.
Healing influence. Well, I'm working on my coffee, so talk to me in a few minutes.
Actually, I'm worried today we might set some people off. We are going to be talking about marking in your books later on.
No.
And for some people that might be too much.
I was going to say, we usually shy away from controversial topics, but I think we might cross that line today.
Yes, we can say whatever we want about a book, about an author.
Yeah.
But how we treat these books.
That's right. It's a whole different story, as we found out.
Oh, well, we did release a Patreon bonus episode last week. It's kind of a Valentine's treat for Patreon listeners. Just want to say thanks to everyone there again. It's fun to do that. It's fun to see the feedback. We just got together and recorded about a couple of books. We said, hey, why don't you think of a couple of books? I'll think of a couple that we want to talk about, and let's go. And we didn't say what kind of books, books you want to read, books you've read, books you forgot about. We didn't do anything like that. And I thought it turned out pretty fun.
Yeah, I did too. I always enjoy those ones. I like the ones where we have more structured, well, people who listen may not think we're very structured, but I like the ones where we have a specific topic to talk about. But sometimes it's just fun to just chat about books.
Well, it leads to some things that maybe we weren't planning on. So, for example, I talked about potentially starting to read The Invention of Morel to my oldest two sons, and or should I just reread A Month in the Country by myself? And I started reading The Invention of Morel to my sons.
Oh, you did? Nice.
Yeah.
Going okay so far?
I think so. I think they're intrigued and curious, and we've only done a couple of sit downs to go. It's a short book, and we're about halfway through, but we've only done it in 2 doses. So I'm excited to see where it gets when they start to know what's going on. Right now, they're just, I think, confused but intrigued.
Right. Well, that pretty much sums up my feelings the first time I read it too. So sounds like they're right where they should be.
That's right. And they're good sports. If they're not liking it, I can't tell.
Yeah. Just be quiet and let Dad think we like it.
Now, one other thing I wanted to bring up in terms of feedback is the last episode we did our Valentine's Day, different categories of book love. And over on Goodreads, one of our listeners posted, hey, this is what's going on the Mooks and the Gripes Goodreads page, which I'm not too active on, to be honest, but it's a great place for discussion about new books and different reading challenges. And a lot of it's focused on what books are in book prizes, but a lot of good people talking about what's coming out. There are a lot of great discussions. Anyway, they took our task in a different direction there and ran with it. And I think it is so funny. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
If I treated lovers as I treat books.
Oh, there you go.
I would want to date someone because they were on a prize list. Since all my friends had tried them and enjoyed them. I'd received an advanced dating copy from NetTinder. Someone left him in my hotel room.
Oh, wow.
I'd already dated all their siblings. They came as part of a subscription. I'd feel rude saying no because someone lent them to me. They had been sitting on my shelf patiently for years. A few more here. I'd been vaguely eyeing them for years, and suddenly the time seems right. And then we dated before, but now they have a natty new outfit, and I have to have them again.
Oh, there you go.
And here's, I'm going to just keep going here for a second. I'd abruptly end a lot of first dates before dinner even arrived, because someone more interesting walked in. I'd make plans with many lovers, and then not show up. Let's see. Let's see what's going on. During an evening spent with one, I'd excuse myself to go spend time with another, and then dash
Wow.
back to the first. And then here, this one's pretty fun too. Here's another list. This is my last little list here. I'd fall in love with centenarians. I'd tattoo my name on them so people know they are mine. I'd underline my favorite parts. I'd leave them in piles by my bed or boxed away in the basement. That's a little bit gruesome, but
I was
I
gonna
get you.
say.
I'd share them with friends and family. Fall asleep while listening to them. Abandon them if they are too cruel. Enjoy 2 or 3 at the same time. Showcase my favorites on my shelf. Rank their performance. And I'd occasionally break their spines, but feel really bad about it.
Wow, that one went dark.
So anyway, I thought that was a really fun thread that they like I say just took off and ran with. Thanks for doing that. No one said I could use their names. It's public, you can go join Goodreads and join the Mooks and the Gripes page and search around for it. But I also thought, well, I won't share anybody's name just in case they were
Yeah,
sharing it just for that group. But
well, that's fun. And I will say that makes me appreciate books even more because it makes it clear when you frame it like that how much they actually put up with from us.
that's right. That's right. They're patient.
Exactly.
They sit and wait.
Take much abuse.
All right, Paul. What have you been reading?
Yeah, I have been on a good little streak. We talked a little bit about how we finished up Grand Hotel as part of that fun reading project. So I finished that, and that was just everything it was cracked up to be. I loved the whole thing, and as you mentioned on our Patreon episode, I think it was, it really picks up momentum at the end. Not to say that it's slow, but there's a lot of getting to know people throughout, and then it all really comes together very quickly and dramatically at the
Yeah.
end. So yeah, I really liked that. And then within like a day of finishing that, I was like, how when you finish a book you love and you're like, man, how am I going to follow that up? And so I decided to with one that I was pretty sure I would love, and I ended up reading My Phantoms by Gwendolyn Riley. I think I was the last person on book Twitter to actually pick that one up. And
We've been waiting for you.
oh, it's so nice when a book lives up to the hype. That has just been praised to the moon and back so many times by so many people I trusted that I was pretty sure that I would love it, and I did. I mean, that is just a masterful book. In some ways, it reminded me of Cold Enough for Snow by Jessica Au. Just that
Hmm.
it's a very different book, but the intimate look into a mother-daughter relationship that you get to see, and how
Interesting.
a little more forthcoming, I think, with some of the details, but at the same time you can read between the lines and kind of pick up on a lot of their history and things like that. But wow, just the mother character in My Phantoms is
Mm.
a fascinating character, so well drawn, so realistic, damaged and fairly
Mm-hmm.
times, but at the same time you can also kind of empathize with her and even find her daughter going through these different cycles of like, maybe what we find with some of our relatives or people we know where they annoy you. There's all this history that drives you nuts, but then there are those moments where you kind of have to like acknowledge certain parts of them and give them credit. And I don't know, it was just so well done. I loved it for sure. I was going to ask you, have you read what's her other main one that's out from NYRB? Do you know?
First Loves? No, I have not actually.
I haven't
I
either, but
I
I'm
want.
like, now I need to
I'm
pick
kind
up
of
some
holding
more.
it. Yeah, I'm kind of
Hmm.
holding it off, but yeah. Um, did you by any chance check out Rohan Mateson's thoughts on My Phantoms
I haven't checked them out yet. No.
or Cold Enough for Snow?
Oh
so
no.
so she read them kind of one after the other,
Oh wow.
and she did not like My Phantoms.
I did
Uh,
see her post something saying, I can't remember, I don't want to quote her, but I think she said it was a little too cold for her, or something along those lines.
Yeah, and I kind of like that. A little too cold for her, but then she read and really liked No Cold for Snow, or No Cold for Snow, Too Cold for Snow.
Hmm.
The reason I say that is I'm looking at her article here, her post that she wrote on Too Cold for Snow, and it says no longer cold, and part of it is just the sense of warmth in Cold Enough for Snow that she felt was missing in My Phantoms, and
Hmm.
she's it's really fun to chat with her because
Oh yeah.
um, she's got great taste, and she's very articulate about why certain things appeal and why certain things don't to her, which I really just appreciate because
Yeah.
I mean I loved My Phantoms, and we just chatted about that just briefly. I mean, in a couple of tweets. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
they were saying, but it led me to think a lot more about
Yeah.
it all. But I just thought it was interesting that you compare the two as well, since that was for her. Jessica Al's Too Cold for Snow
Cold enough
was,
for time. Yeah.
yeah, okay.
No,
The
I
book I
think I
have
called
not
it.
read.
I think I called it Too Cold for Snow on an episode several ago, and I think I got us both down that path. So yeah,
That's
no,
what
no,
happened. It's your
yeah, it's
fault.
all my fault.
um, anyway, just really loved that one, and I need to pick that one up still. I don't
Yeah,
have it.
you do. I think you'd love that one. And it's so interesting the way that people that you know, like you said, she is so insightful and well spoken. And she, every time I read a post by her, I can always understand her point of view. But that's one of the things I
Yeah.
love about all this is My Phantoms. I think I understand. I'll have to read her blog to make sure that I don't put words in her mouth, but I think I understand what she's saying. But at
Hmm.
the same time, I definitely they're damaged characters and the relationship can sometimes get a little mean spirited, but man, it felt so real. And I also felt like there was some true feeling, some warmth, some heat behind it. So, it's just interesting how different people interpret a book or based on their own lives or just whatever the case may be. But yeah, I'll have to read those thoughts.
Hmm.
But I did think, despite I understand what I think she's saying, but I don't know. There's so much like underlying passion and damage behind that too. That I don't know. It's just a very interesting
She mentioned
relationship.
something like, I think she knows a lot of us really like it, and I think she said something that a lot of you are cerebral readers. Um, which I'd love to follow up on a conversation with her a little bit
Hmm.
on all of that, because certainly she's I don't think, again, we're talking about someone who's not here to tell us what they're really thinking, but hopefully she will. Um, uh, I know she's not thinking that she's not thoughtful
Right.
or pensive, or that she didn't, or that there's some kind of intelligence barrier.
Hmm.
It's a certain type of a different type of appeal, and I thought that's an interesting conversation because, again, like you say, I love reading her
Hmm.
thoughts on anything, whether I liked it, didn't like it, didn't read it, won't read it, um, and I've gotten to not only understand and be able to kind of feel through my own thoughts on things, but she gives me a desire to be a better thinker and
Yeah.
a better
Absolutely.
communicator about how I feel about books and reading in
Mm.
general. She's so good at that. And so
She really is.
thanks Rowan for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And look forward to many more conversations.
Absolutely. Well, and then if we have time, can I steal in with one more thing I'm reading?
Yeah.
I finally got to The Passenger by Cormac McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
After a decade-long wait, I decided, why not wait a couple more months, apparently. So, but yeah, I started that a couple days ago. And, so far, I think when you talked about it on an episode quite a while back, you had talked about how you were a little bit wrong-footed for the first sections
Mm-hmm.
because it does skip around. And, I won't say that I have a full grasp of what's going on right now, but I'm really enjoying it. And I was just going to read the opening, just the first page. It
Yeah.
was so nice to be back with Cormac. So I'll just quickly read that. It said, "It had snowed lightly in the night, and her frozen hair was gold and crystalline, and her eyes were frozen cold and hard as stones. One of her yellow boots had fallen off and stood in the snow beneath her. The shape of her coat lay dusted in the snow where she dropped it, and she wore only a white dress, and she hung among the bare gray poles of the winter trees, with her head bowed and her hands turned slightly outward, like those of certain ecumenical statues whose attitude asks that their history be considered, that the deep foundation of the world be considered, where it has its being in the sorrow of her creatures. The hunter knelt and stogged his rifle upright in the snow beside him and took off his gloves and let them fall and folded his hands one upon the other. He thought that he should pray, but he'd no prayer for such a thing. He bowed his head. Tower of ivory, he said, house of gold. He knelt there for a long time. When he opened his eyes, he saw a small shape half buried in the snow, and he leaned and dusted away the snow and picked up a golden chain that held a steel key, a white gold ring. He slipped them into the pocket of his hunting coat. He'd heard the wind in the night, the wind's work, a trash can clattering over the bricks behind his house, the snow blowing out there in the forest in the dark. He looked up into those cold, enameled eyes glinting blue in the weak winter light. She had tied her dress with a red sash so that she'd be found, some bit of color in the scrupulous desolation, on this Christmas day, this cold and barely spoken Christmas day. It's like, whew. I mean, like,
I
don't know
remember when
where.
I picked it up too,
Oh my
and
God.
it felt the same thing of like, oh, here we are,
Yeah,
Cormac.
I know. For those who don't, I think he's a divisive author in some ways, and for those who don't like him, that probably didn't do a thing for you. But for people like me, and I think probably Trevor, I don't want to speak for you, but it's like catnip just to be back. I missed him and all of his strange phrasings and beautiful descriptions and the darkness and everything else. So yeah, I'll report back as I make my way through it. I'm maybe like 35 pages in, something like that. But more than anything, I just appreciate that we got a chance to see at least a couple more books from him, and looking forward to diving in further. I am afraid to ask. I don't know that I ever heard any updates after your initial report.
Well, I have a confession to make.
Okay.
I'm probably about 45 pages into it.
Okay.
I started it and really enjoyed it. It just came at a time when there were other things that I found more important to read.
Yeah.
And I was getting kind of lost and feeling like I needed to reread it already.
Mm-hmm.
You're in that section where she is like being visited by ghosts almost, it feels.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I need to reread that, but I haven't yet. So I have not finished it. And
Okay.
it's also at about that time that there was kind of a bigger backlash.
Yeah.
Like this is not good. And I thought I need to read this when I don't have all those voices in my head.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I apologize. I actually did not finish it. So I have not even picked up Stella Maris yet to see how that one, follows up. And I've
Yeah.
heard both things on that, like, oh, it's a great culmination. You want to read it, and it definitely satisfies. And there's like, I don't even think this is like the cutting room floor. And
Mm.
I'm like, I guess I need to just, get
Try it.
there when I'm ready for it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. As much as I do love, being in on all these conversations, there are those times, like you said, where you get something in your head and you kind of wish you hadn't, just for the simple fact of it's nice
Yeah.
to come to it with a fresh face. I mean, I don't remember
Sp-
who it was, but somebody that I know and trust on Twitter had done a ranking of the Cormac McCarthy novels, and they ranked these two. I don't know if it was at the top, but it was like top 3, top 4.
mhm.
So that gave me
Which
hope
is
again.
good.
Yeah, I know. It's even
I
if it's divisive, I don't mind like if people have differing opinions, because that means there's plenty of room for,
mhm.
interpretation and personalities, So just the fact that some people love it that much makes me think there's value to it, and it might just be one of those where it hits different people different ways. Or
And I'll admit that probably another reason that I desisted wasn't so much that it was other people, it's that I found myself lining up with them maybe a little bit.
yeah,
By
yeah.
about page 50 or 60, I think I was like, I'm hmm
Mm-hmm.
this is feeling very opaque and not in a good Cormac McCarthy way. And I felt like, no, this is not the time to persist
Yeah,
and
no,
and
I mean, there's
and
no reason
read
to
through
push it.
this sense.
And maybe when you return to it in a month or a year, you'll still feel the
Hmm.
same way. But as we've talked about, there are other times where it's just not the right time, and you read it later, and oh, this is a completely different book.
Yeah, it's not one that I've put away and said I'm never starting it again, or even that I'm only going to start again in a long time.
Hmm.
Um, I kind of just set it aside, I guess, and I do need to get back to it and intend to. So
Yeah, well, great. Well, I didn't mean to take up so much time with my reading, but reading so
that's
many
okay.
great books or interesting books, it's hard not to talk about them. So yeah, how about you? What have you been reading?
Well, so for a follow up on the NYRB Women 23, the next
Mm.
book that we started yesterday, today's Saturday, February 18th, we started it yesterday on the 17th, is Dorothy Baker's Young Man with a Horn, which I mean, I don't really know anything about it still. I've read the prologue and the first few sections, but man, she's a good writer. I am very excited to get further into this one and get through it. We'll be reading it by the end of the month, but I'm not too far into it yet. Um, But I guess maybe I'll just to share a little bit, since I won't with the other two things I want to talk about. In the prologue, she already mentions that the subject of this book is one of these who burns out, in a blaze of artistic, brilliance, but dies young.
Mm.
And the narrator says, one of these days, even his records will be played out and give forth nothing but scratching under a steel needle. When that time comes, Rick Martin will really be dead as a doornail, and I hate to see it happen. And just, I'm like, ooh, this is
Mm-hmm.
to start with us knowing at the end, at least in terms of all that, and with that kind of more pessimistic look here. But, this is what it's about. It says, our man is, I hate to say it, an artist, burdened with that difficult baggage, the soul of an artist. But he hasn't got the thing that should go with it, and which I suppose seldom does, the ability to keep the body in check while the spirit goes on being what it must be.
That's
So,
really
yeah,
good.
excited to get further in that. But I think you'll be excited to hear that I went back after really enjoying John Darnielle's Devil House and
Mm-hmm.
listened to both Wolf in White Van and Universal Harvester over the last couple of
Oh,
weeks.
that's amazing. Love it.
So, as you said, he narrates them both. He does that with Devil House as well.
Mm.
But he is a great reader.
Oh man, I
And
love his audio.
so I really thought these were great books. Both of them. And probably my favorite still Devil House. I think that I just like so much about that one, and maybe it's because it was the first one. But I love how strange these are. These are quite a bit shorter
Mm-hmm.
than Devil House. Just strange. And Wolf in White Van, I was on board from start to finish. Universal Harvester, I was definitely on board at the start. I thought, man, this is such an intriguing premise. This video store employee, and people finding someone has been recording things that just look sinister
Mm-hmm.
on the movies and bringing them back to the store. And they go out to the farmhouse where they're like, I think this is where it's being recorded. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? Is this
I know.
like Blair Witch Project? What kind of things are happening? And then the book takes a major twist and detour for the middle half. And I thought, I don't think I don't think I'm gonna like this one. And then somehow by the end, I'm like really touched and really still impressed, still feeling the dread and still feeling that a conflict of feelings of this is something horrible is going on, but something beautiful. I don't know yet. I'm just finished it the other day,
Yeah.
and I can't quite figure out. I don't really know if I missed things that I should know that would spell it out a little more clearly. It's definitely a weird kind of confusing ending
Mm-hmm.
for me, because I'm like, well, he has it both ways. He has it sinister and beautiful,
Right.
and I don't know if I missed something to be able to land on one side or the other, or if that's part of it. I don't know, but I was very happy with it by the end. I was like, oh, this is pretty brilliant, actually.
Yeah. No, I mean your summary of that one kind of sums up my feelings of it too. It's been a few years, quite a few years since I read it, but I remember having a very similar reaction, like not sure if I missed something, wanting to reread it, which I have not yet done, but yeah, I don't know. There might be more to it or there might not be, but he is so good at exactly what you just described, like that walking that line of sinister but like still heartfelt. And I don't know, as a musician
Hmm.
I feel like those books are like earworms, where they just get into your head and you can't get them out. And I mean, every one of his books, I still, kind of like you said, for me I think Wolf and White Van is probably still my favorite, and it's probably because it was the first one that I came across, and I've talked about that experience of listening to it
Yeah.
while we were on a road trip and everything. So that one just embedded itself so strongly because of multiple reasons. But yeah, every one of his books, I love all of them, but they all hit you and just stick for me. And it sounds like for you too. So yeah, I'm really glad to hear that you dove in. And
Yeah, I'm ready for another one.
well, and
What?
he's John Darnielle is, I know, yeah. What's taking so long? He actually does have an older one. I can't remember the name of it, and I think it's, I don't know, I don't know if it's a minor work, quote unquote, type of a thing, but I've thought about looking it up and grabbing it sometime, because he does have one more that he wrote. a while back. But
I don't think I knew that. I thought he wrote these three.
yeah, I don't remember what it's called, but I was talking to some.
Wikipedia just says he has written three novels: Wolf and White
Oh,
Van, Universal Harvester, and Devil House. But he's so involved in other things. It looks like he's got a novella. Well,
yeah,
that would be it. Black
that must
Sabbath.
be what it is. Yeah, that's it. Black Sabbath's Master of Reality. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I mean, that one. Not that this is like the way to judge things, but it has like 4.5 stars on Amazon. So it's not like it's some, you know,
Yeah.
minor thing that nobody pays attention to. So I can't remember if I mentioned this, but I saw him read here in Denver at the Tattered Cover for Devil House, and got a chance to just briefly talk to him. And he's just a fascinating, really, really intelligent guy. And he has obviously the musical chops, but he is a huge proponent of translated fiction too. And that's one thing I appreciate about him is with his platform, he'll shoot videos, that on Instagram or various other places, and he'll be talking about what he's reading, and he's reading NYRB classics or Archipelago or all these other things. So like he didn't have enough going for him, he's also he's one of us.
So it looks like the Black Sabbath book is
Mm-hmm.
about Black Sabbath. It's that 33 and a third series where great writers will pick an album
Ah, okay,
and
that
write
makes
about
sense.
it. So you've got, the whole series of people writing about, Achtung Baby or, um, let's see here. I mean, 69 Love Songs, uh, Highway 61 Revisited. That's actually written by Mark Pulizotti, who does a lot of our favorite translations.
Oh, cool. And I love that
Um,
album too, so I might have to check that one out too.
I feel like Andy Miller from Backlisted maybe wrote one of these, but I'm not seeing it, so I could be wrong there. But I, for some reason, was thinking that he wrote one in this as well. But anyway, so yeah, that's probably why it doesn't pop up that
That
often
makes
as
sense.
a work of fiction. But that's pretty cool. I mean, he's a great writer and a
Mm-hmm.
great musician. This should be still worth checking out.
Absolutely. Great.
All right, well, marking books. Let's move on to that subject and see
Mm-hmm.
see how much ire we can raise.
That's right.
Um, I Part of the reason we chose this is I think you want to join the cult of a bookmarker. Is that right? You don't usually do it, but you've been impressed by some things you've seen. You're sensing some transcendent potential for yourself
Yeah,
and your relationship with books, and you want to join in with the bookmarkers. Is that right?
exactly. No, that's pretty close. I mean, I've for years been very much in the pristine, club of just keeping them as clean as possible, putting them up on the shelf when you're done, and just moving on. And I don't remember when it started, but I think like when I read War and Peace, I started. Well, I take that back. Back in college, of course, I would write, in those books, and I did enjoy it, but it still felt very illicit. And then I've gone for years and years and just been very much in the camp of just, like I said, unblemished. But when I was reading War and Peace a couple years ago, I started kind of making some underlines and notes and, testing the waters a little bit. And it really helped. And it actually, what started to intrigue me is that it did start to feel more interactive, and I felt like it increased my ability to understand and slow down and dig in instead of just buzzing through it. And so, yeah, we had, it was back at the beginning of this month. I had been talking a little bit on Twitter about that and got into a little mini conversation with, Rebecca and Dorian and a few other people about, and it kind of just brought up some of these things of, I said something like, it still feels illicit to me, but I'm starting to warm up to it, and seeing in particular Chris Via on his
Hmm.
videos, he has all those tabs, and when he opens up a book to look at it, you can see all of his notes and underlining. And it's always intrigued me the way that people can really just dig in and immerse themselves. So seeing that, has really gotten me interested. And it was kind of cool because after we had been talking about that, he chipped in on Twitter and said, "I
Hmm.
love seeing this thread. For the record, I spent the majority of my reading life seeing any markings in books as a sort of defilement or a desecration." And he says, "It wasn't until I realized that it helps me have a conversation with the book that I saw it as valuable." And I really like that. I think that is what's pulling me into it. Is that idea of having a conversation with the book. I was
with the
listening to
book.
the Book Cougars just the other day, and they brought this up in passing, and they said they talked about how much they liked, like, if you get a used book and somebody has written in it. They said a lot of times it drives them crazy, but sometimes you see a previous reader having an argument with the author. They said, and they said that they really liked that. And one of them, I can't remember if it was Chris or Emily, said, "I like my books to feel lived in." And so I thought that was kind of drawing the demarcation. Not that
Hmm.
there, I mean, it's a spectrum. I've come to realize that as we've talked to people, but I think some people like their books to feel lived in and loved and used and sometimes abused, and other people it's like book as object, book as art. So I think, not to put too fine a point on it, but I think that is at least the beginning of where the conversation might start. Is just
Yeah.
there's some different camps like that.
Well, I think it goes to, maybe it's worth starting with a little bit of an interrogation on why do we want our books to be pristine? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a fair point. And I'm partially in that camp because
Yeah.
my books on the shelf do generally look completely unread when I'm finished with them. On the outside, I don't break the spines usually.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if people do that with their books, but I don't do it with mine.
Mm-hmm.
They're still quite tightly bound. Actually, I don't. I guess I don't open them all the way or something like
No,
that,
I'm the same way. Yeah.
and it works out fine. I don't dog ear pages. That to me is like, oh, Dorian. But again, I'm like, wait, hold on. There, hold on, Trevor. um, because I do mark up my books on the inside, sometimes quite heavily. In fact, on this reread of Invention of Morel, I had a pen back when I read it the first time, apparently.
Oh, interesting.
And I wasn't steady-handed. It wasn't sitting. I think I told you in that episode, I remember reading it on a trip back west, like on a nice summer day out in the backyard of my in-laws' house. And apparently, without opening the book very hard, I would just kind of scribble and mark with my pen, which I know some
Mm.
people would be like, I don't use pens. I want it to look nice. And I generally do too. I'll get into that just a little bit. But I think it's kind of fun to go back and see my own experience reading it the first time and seeing what stood out to me then
Yeah.
and what's standing out to me this time. And I do think that that's one of the reasons that book has always stuck with me. Certain parts is because I put myself into the book a little bit more than I do in other books that I just kind of breeze through. For me, the marking is I don't know, it deepens my relationship with the book in some way. I can't quite
Yeah.
explain it, but why do we want a book to be pristine? Like, what's that? Where's the impulse? Because both of us have been there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you more recently, I think. What is the purpose of a book that is pristine inside and out if you've already read it? What do you think?
Yeah. It's a complicated question because I don't know that I have I think it's emotional for me. It's
Hmm.
I love them as objects. I love them
Yeah.
as almost friends. And so the thought, I think, of having this preserved and perfect memory or something to revisit over and over again, I think has always been what has propelled me to keep them that way. And
Yeah.
you go to a used bookstore and you see like the free bin or the $1 bin, and you see all these like tattered, abused books, and it just like, oh, breaks your heart a little bit. And so I think for me, a lot of it is just this emotional response of like, I value them, so therefore they deserve to be taken care of. Like,
Hmm.
not a museum piece as in not to be touched, but just the same way that you give reverence to something, a piece of art that you think is beautiful in a museum. I think one argument would be
Hmm.
that's kind of what you're doing here. And I know then the counter argument would be the contents are the art, but
Yeah.
the package not necessarily. So, but I do think that for me was always what it was, is like, I love this. This is like a big part of my life. And why would I not treat it with reverence?
I think there's a bit of that with my response as well. There's this sense of wanting it to still be new in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think there's an impulse that you have to share these with people, that you don't want them to come upon your book that is tattered and marked in, but you want it to be fresh for them, or is there nothing of that? Because frankly, I don't usually lend my books out to people, so I
Yeah.
don't think for me that's a big part of it
Now I was gonna
because
say I think mine is more selfish.
honest yeah. Well, and honestly, when I've lent books out to people, that's when I've learned I do care about these things looking nice
Yeah.
because they often come back just and I think I've maybe mentioned this before. I've lent out a few books over my time that have come back, and I thought, what did you do to this thing?
Yeah. I know.
Seriously, I can't even I cannot imagine getting a book that looks pristine and returning it to the owner looking like I've been bending it, taking it on walks in the rain, you
Hmm.
know, like that. I couldn't imagine doing that with someone else's book. I guess people do it with their own, that they treating them like lovers. I like to go on walks in the rain with them.
Right. Exactly. It's funny you say walks in the rain because I've talked before about how my brother and a friend of ours go on backpacking trips in the Colorado mountains most summers. And I often lend them each a book. And I will admit that often they're books that, like I do have some books that are more like trade paperbacks and things where I'm not quite as attached to them. But a couple of years ago, I loaned our friend a copy of True Grit, Charles Portis's book. And through no fault of his own, we got caught in a major rainstorm and there was major leaks. And, it was one of those camping situations where all hell broke loose. But yeah, by the end of this trip, poor, poor True Grit was just soggy mess. And so, yeah, it's like, I do try to be the person who will loan out a book, but a few situations like that, even if it's nobody's fault necessarily, like if that had happened to me and it had been under my watch, I would have been like, oh, okay. But it's hard not to like take it personally, when it's somebody else with your book. So yeah, there's definitely, it gets complicated.
But does it also push you to be like the initial impulse? And maybe not, but I guess also when people have returned books to me that are now a little bit more worn, I've been like, I guess I'm okay with it to an extent. Like, I guess
Hmm.
it's not as big of a deal. I I've softened on that a lot over
Hmm.
the last several years,
I have too.
and I don't know. Again, we're there are a lot of people who I don't think either one of us is trying to say one side is or convert another side to our
No.
point of view because there is that spectrum, and I think both of them have their fine points.
Yeah.
Just like there are people who are like, why would you ever own a book? You can
Right.
just check it out from the library. The only thing that's important is that you have engaged with the text in some way. And
Yeah.
it's like, well, no, I love having books to look at and books that to keep me company and several of them. I love that's an important part of my life. It isn't just about always what's on the inside. It's about the potential because you can see them, because you can hold them, because they are beautiful. So I get both sides of it
I do
when it
too.
comes to all of that.
Can I read? So there's this
Yeah.
essay that I came across that I think ties very nicely into this, and I think that the two camps, so to speak, it does a wonderful job. So I've talked a lot about Anne Fadiman and how much I love her essays, and in particular her book Ex Libris. And she has an essay in that book called "Never Do That to a Book," and it starts off with her brother leaving. They're in a hotel room, and he's leaving it like splayed open. The book is splayed open. The spine is broken, and a chambermaid, as she calls her, comes in and says, never do that to a book. And so she says, I came to realize that just as there is more than one way to love a person, so is there more than one way to love a book. The chambermaid believed in courtly love. A book's physical self was sacrosanct to her, its form inseparable from its content. Her duty as a lover was platonic adoration, a noble but doomed attempt to conserve forever the state of perfect chastity in which it had left the bookseller. The Fadiman family believed in carnal love. To us, a book's words were holy, but the paper, cloth, cardboard, glue, thread, and ink that contained them were a mere vessel, and it was no sacrilege to treat them as wantonly as desire and pragmatism dictated. Hard use was a sign not of disrespect, but of intimacy. And then she goes on a little bit more. I'll just quickly. It says, I confess to marking my place promiscuously, sometimes splaying, sometimes committing the even more egregious sin of dog earing the page. Here I managed to be simultaneously abusive and compulsive. I turned down the upper corner for page marking and the lower corner to identify passages I want to Xerox for my commonplace books. She says, courtly lovers always remove their bookmarks when the assignation is over. Carnal lovers are likely to leave romantic mementos, often three-dimensional and messy. And then just one more paragraph. She says, the most permanent and thus to the courtly lover, the most terrible thing one can leave in a book is one's own words. Even I would never write in an encyclopedia, but I've been annotating novels and poems, transforming monologues into dialogues, ever since I learned to read. Byron Dobell says that his most beloved books, such as the Essays of Montaigne, have been written on so many times in so many different periods of his life in so many colors of ink that they have become palimpsests. And so I just love that whole essay, but I thought it tied in perfectly to what we were talking about. And I like that, the idea of the courtly lover versus, the
Yeah,
other types of love that you can do, the carnal love. So I thought that was kind of funny.
I do really like that. And, and you can kind of see where she probably stands on it just by the words that she
Mm-hmm.
uses. I would like to read a counter essay by someone who adopts the courtly love, but who doesn't maybe write about it in that same way, but figures out a poetic, more even emotional
Mm.
reason for it being that way. Because you say courtly love, and I start to think prim and proper and a little bit
Mm-hmm.
misguided, perhaps. Reverence to the wrong things. Beholden to rules rather than to your own self. But at the same time, that rings true to me because just like Chris Via's tweet said, I really like how he says it's about his conversation with the book, and that's how I feel about marking them. I do feel like makes me engage more because I know
Mm-hmm.
that I can mark. I know that I can write down things. Um, I think both of us are kind of on that side. So maybe now is a good time to start talking about different ways you have done it that have been helpful, or ways that you have found not quite as satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Are there ways that you've done it that have been more beneficial to you as a reader? Because I will say there are ways to do this to make your book still look like a piece of art. You get on Instagram and you see these people who mark their books with little sticky notes that are, like they've written in calligraphy, it looks like, on them, and they've got beautiful color coordinated tabs and markers, and they've got their rulers out, and it's pretty beautiful to look at the way some of these folks have annotated their pages
Yeah, absolutely.
for a photograph. I mean, it then starts to veer back into it still can look beautiful to the point
Mm-hmm.
where I want to see pictures of your bookmarkings, not because I want to see what you wrote. I don't care what you wrote. You may have just written a bunch of things that, as an undergrad, uh, plot moving forward, or I don't
Right.
know, but it's the how you did it that is so beautiful and intriguing. Does But the reason I bring that up is my favorite way of marking a book these days that I really want to engage with is reading it. Maybe taking pictures with my phone of the passages that I want to come back to. And then when I'm done reading for that day, getting out my pens. I do use a gray pen. This is because I just think it's permanent, but it also is soft. It doesn't bleed
Mm-hmm.
through pages, even thin pages. It's the Winsor Newton gray pen, and I will mark these passages and use a ruler to underline them. And it's very satisfying to me to go back and almost have that study session again, or this revisiting again.
Yeah.
I find some passages, I read them and I'm like, why did I take a picture of that?
Mm-hmm.
And others become even deeper for me. And so I really like doing it that way. That is a way for me to really engage with the book and continue that engagement even after I've kind of put the book down for reading purposes, but have kept it for marking purposes. I like that as much as I've ever liked going through it and just highlighting as I go,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe not going back and ever checking what I highlighted.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but
No.
it is totally because I enjoy the process, and I think it engages me with the books a little bit more, as Chris Via was saying in his
Yeah.
tweet.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's what I found too. I mean, like I said, I'm still very much in the formative phase, so I don't know that I have really settled on anything. I will say that mostly stick to pencil. I'm still,
Hmm.
that's like how, if I change my mind, I can always erase this. Um, but I have like, I was in a conversation with, it was with Christina Getson on Twitter, and we were talking about this, and she said that she really likes to highlight. And it's interesting that gray, you mentioned gray, that seems to be a common theme. Maybe it's less offensive or less, like harsh, but she talked about she likes the mild gray zebra midliner highlighters for
Hmm.
hers. And so, it's interesting. I'm still kind of flirting with the idea of like what would be the next steps if I do this, but I have really been enjoying tabs. I've been doing a
Yeah,
lot of
I do love
tabs.
tabs. Hmm.
hmm So I've been doing a lot of that. So I will underline or put stars or exclamation points kind of thing next to like really good passages, not necessarily tabbing every single one. But so far, what I've been doing is like if there's a consistent, like a page or something that just stands out, like either due to length or just it's so good that I want to like make sure I don't miss it at all, I'll usually do underlining and tabs. So, like I said, it's still very much an organic process. But I've also, like over the years with War and Peace and other ones, like when people say this is a book that has a huge cast of characters, sometimes they disappear for 100 pages and come back and you don't know who it is. I have also kept like a side notebook for some of those where when a character is
Hmm.
introduced, I will write down the page number and their name and a short description and then like update that as they pop back in. And so that's something I've done, and I've debated whether I would ever want to do that in the pages of the book, like whether it's the first time a character is introduced, just mark that page and underline it somehow, just in some of those big epics, for
Yeah.
example. So I don't know. I think that's kind of the fun of it. And I guess in theory, it would be nice to have like a final, you know, finalized strategy. But at least for me so
Well,
far, it's not like that at all.
well, and I myself don't like, even though that's my favorite way, and I tend to do that with the bigger books that I'm engaging with, or maybe books that I think are a little more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not my only way. When reading Grand Hotel this time around, and even reading Young Man with the Horn, I'm doing it with these like crayon highlighters. I did get you some, Paul. I need to send those to you,
Oh,
by the way.
nice.
Hopefully, they'll be fun for you. But they're just
Absolutely.
these. They're not crayons.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not gonna. They stay ever sharp because they're just a thin lead almost, but it's a crayon that you unwind and
Oh,
the end
okay.
pops out, and they're various colors. And I really like doing that too with books that maybe I'm not thinking this is going to be something I always want to come back to and engage with philosophically, but I want to see these beautiful passages.
Yeah.
I want to be reminded, like with the Young Man with the Horn, I marked the passages that I read earlier today, and they were the only passages that I marked. I didn't highlight, or I did. Sorry, I did highlight them. I did not put a tab there because I can
Mm-hmm.
just kind of skim through and see them and be like, "Oh yeah, I love that part," or
Mm-hmm.
that is something that I enjoyed. And so I'm doing that more for the passages than for the um, than a different kind of engagement with them. But I had a question: when you do like your book, do you write in your notebooks in pen or pencil? Because what if you're like that character turned out to not be very important? Do you erase it, or do you just be
Yeah,
like, oh,
it's definitely one of the tricky parts. Like I said, War and Peace is a big messy book, so I justified it by saying my notebook will also be big and messy.
big and messy?
So often there would be somebody like you said, they get introduced, and at that point you have no idea if they'll be a main character, if they'll be a minor
Hmm.
character, and so there are
I can
definitely ones that kind of trail off quickly, and it's like one
Yeah.
entry,
I can
page
see
12.
that being a barrier to wanting to mark your book because it's like I thought at the time this would be important. It turns out it's not, and now I wish I
Exactly.
could delete it.
Exactly.
Um,
Whereas in a
but
notebook, it's like you can just leave it and it moves on. Yeah. No, it's definitely something that's where, like I said, I have never come across any process that works perfectly for me.
along these lines, this is a little bit of a tangent, if you'll forgive me.
I will forgive you.
I know we have a few of these. Do you like having empty notebooks? Like, do you go into, say, a stationery shop and think, "Oh, that is a beautiful notebook." You like the way its pages are lined out. You like
Mm-hmm.
that it's maybe a hardcover with a ribbon,
Mm-hmm.
and then you buy it. And
And it
because
sits
it's
there.
so pristine, and you don't want to fill it with your stupid thoughts,
Yes.
you want them to be brilliant. If you're going to use this beautiful notebook, it better, the stuff inside better match what's on the outside, so it sits there
Yeah.
unwritten in.
I definitely, I have not gone too far down that road, but I have several of those that are just these beautiful, pristine things that I've either received as gifts or bought a few of them myself. And yeah, for all the reasons you just said, that's exactly the struggle. But then I was just telling my wife the other day, we were wandering around a bookstore, and there was all these beautiful pens. I saw the midliner markers. I saw all these notebooks and stationery, or like somebody was posting from a stationery store in New York the other day, just gorgeous shelves full of all these beautiful, pen and paper products. And
Hmm.
I told my wife it would take a very gentle push to get me to just fall into that world. I think like I can definitely see the intrigue of it, but what holds me back is, yeah, a combination of my thoughts. I don't feel like are probably justifying that beauty, and also like, like as far as like the writing, people talk about how this pen, it flows so beautifully. Like, do you like gel point? Do you like this? And like, I'll get one that I is just praised to the stars, and I'll start to write, and it's still like my gross, like messy handwriting. I'm like, it's not. I don't suddenly put the pen to paper and it turns into beautiful calligraphy. It's still just my chicken
Yeah.
scratch writing. So yeah, I don't know. It's funny how some of this stuff, like it's the idealized versus the reality of it.
Other people's notebooks tend to always look like they're using them just the right way. And
I
then when
know.
I start to write it, I'm like, I don't want to tear out that page now, but that doesn't matter to me anymore.
I know.
I don't know, but I wonder how much of these impulses are somewhat related. The idealized way of having the book, when you're done reading it, you want it to be this great reflection, the markings you made in it to be the ones that mean something. You don't want to highlight a character who turns out to be completely insignificant a few pages later, but at the
Right.
moment, you thought it was going to be important. And so you do kind of keep that desire to have this be an object, but some of the engagement, some of the impulses maybe we have to get over with even just writing in pristine, beautiful notebooks is just to do it and enjoy being able to look back and see your whole journey and not just the end result. It's been kind of fun to read, like, writers' diaries. Some of them you're like, this is why I don't write in my diary, because this
Right.
is this is someone who's so amazing. But like the Kafka diaries that Ross
Mm,
Benjamin just translated, in that great edition, you can see his false starts, you can see his run on weird sentences that don't really make a whole lot of sense. And yeah, some of that's because it's Kafka, but he does little sketches, and I'm like, he was just, this was his place to think.
yeah.
And yes, it turned out that he had great thoughts, but not maybe all the time. Um, but I'm enjoying reading the journey, and even with bookmarking and such, can I see it that way more than wanting this, someone who comes later on to be like, oh man, this is someone who really knew how to mark up this book the right way. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. There was actually a whole I don't have his name, Sam Anderson, I believe it is, from the New York Times, has done over the years entire series on marginalia, and he would like take pictures and put his out like a year in marginalia and things like that. And I came across somebody who was writing about that, and they said, um, he says he does it not, quote, not just to passively read, but to fully enter a text, to collaborate with it, to mingle with an author on some kind of primary textual plane. And I really liked that. And they talked too about some of the how you start to kind of maybe cringe a little bit at the thought of somebody else picking up one of your books and reading through the marginalia. And I know that's something else that we all struggle, or I don't want to say we all, but I struggle with is, you know when I look back at my Jane Austens from college, or like Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which is the most marked book that I have by far. Maybe I'll post a picture on Twitter. I mean, I notes everywhere. It's really cool and I enjoy it, but it's also like 15, 20, well, more than that now, whatever, 20, 25 years ago. And so there's sometimes that a little bit of embarrassment of like, you were young, or, foreshadowing, or, just whatever, like,
Right.
oh, but at the same time, it's kind of, I don't
Metaphor.
know. Yeah, exactly. But you have to kind of let go of some of that, I think, and just realize that's all part of this journey. I mean, when you're that age, that was groundbreaking and you didn't have any idea. So to you, that was very intellectually stimulating at the time. And just because you've moved along doesn't take away from the value of it, I guess. So
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. There are a lot of personalities and a lot of, this is once again more of a therapy hour almost. Like, why am I the way that I am with my
yeah.
bookmarking?
Well, and we got so many, we asked people to kind of weigh in on their thoughts, and it was just amazing to see the range of
Hmm.
perspectives that people, came down with. Some people were very much pro, some were very anti. I don't know if you want to read maybe a
Well,
few of those, or how do you want to do that?
I I would say reading through them, most people are pro that we
Mm-hmm.
got responses from, that you got responses from.
Yeah.
You highlighted some in red that were anti, and the others in green, and maybe a few that were more neutral in orange. Most of this is green with a little bit of orange, and even the orange ones are more like, oh, I do it in these situations and not in these. And
That's what I was gonna say. Is what's fascinating is there's people where, and I do this too. Like there are some books that I would never mark,
mhm,
or other people say I like. Allison Fincher says I used to be priggish about my book's integrity, but then I worked with medieval manuscripts in grad school. Unless we're talking about an heirloom, a book is just a tool. It's ideas inside that have value, and so it's just interesting. A lot of people have these experiences through work or through studying or different things where they are won over to the idea of notes, but
mhm.
then there are very much the other people who are just, I think one of the funniest ones was Damien. Let
Yeah,
me see if I
one
can
of the
find it.
antis.
Yeah, very anti, because I always like to see his like pictures. He always on Twitter, I've always admired the fact that he has these two gorgeous little girls who are always reading his books and thumbing through them, and I've always admired his ability to just let them handle his
Yeah.
books, and I'm sure they end up with sticky spots and everything else. But having had kids, I know the value of letting them. This obviously means a lot to dad, so therefore I want to be involved with it. But that apparently does not extend to writing in books, because he says, I'm a purist because I cannot be persuaded by Satan to do otherwise. He says, like Proudhon, I once marked a book and the act of violence was so repellent that I both vomited and threw away the damaged thing. So I just thought that was kind of funny. Obviously, a little tongue in cheek, but when it does bring up that whole idea of, for some people, just the idea of it is still very viscerally wrong, and it
Mhm.
just really bothers them. So yeah, it's been really fun to get all these different, and then people will get really into like the very specific things they do, like you
Yeah.
know um, the Ontarian says, I make notes on yellow lined newsprint pads using a particular sort of pen with free flowing ink. I used to mark up my books. I no longer do, as many end up being donated to a charity bookshop later. And I think that's
Mhm.
another interesting thing, and something I've thought about. I think I even asked you about it, is the realities of the size of my house and the number of bookshelves I have. Like I can't hold on to every book like I used to. And so I've tried to get better about doing some culling, and I've wondered about that. Like if you're marking up books, often a used bookstore, if you're trying to trade them in, will explicitly say, if it's marked in, we won't accept it. And so, for you, I think you just said, if that's the case, you would just maybe donate it to a library or something like that. So it does
Yeah.
add some other wrinkles.
Yeah, I guess with that for me, if I've never giving it a book. There's a bookstore in town that uh, I just take all of my books to,
Mm,
and they always ask me, and they already know the answer. If there are some that we can't take, do you want us to keep them and do their thing with them? I don't know if they sell them other ways. I don't know if they pulp them. I have no idea. And I'm just like, yes, whatever you need to do. If you donate them to somewhere else, that's fine. I don't have any sense of ownership of these anymore.
mm-hmm.
They are yours, and I also don't care if I get even a dime back. I actually have a lot of credit at that place because I don't really go there and shop very often. I go there to take my books, and I
Mm,
I have no idea how many. Sometimes I look at their antique books. Like they have a really cool mid-century, I think it's even illustrated, but edition of, and I think it might just be Swan's Way, but it might be
mm,
the whole, Search for Lost Time. I can't remember. And sometimes I'm looking at that and I'm like, I can afford that because of the credit I have in this store. Should I get that? And I'm like, no, I don't really. No, not yet. And
yeah.
um, but yeah, when I take books over there, I figure I'm pushing them out, and I don't. I hope people enjoy them, but I guess I don't. I try not to have that sense that I need to keep my books pristine for whoever may or may not come afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I like the idea of having. I don't like to buy books that are marked by someone else, but sometimes it's a little bit charming.
Yeah, it
But
depends on how it's done, and you can, again, sometimes you'll get some, like I was just talking about my own marginalia from being a student. You'll definitely come
Hmm.
across those where clearly it was like a high school student who,
Yeah.
the first 4 pages are heavily marked, and then after that it's just blank,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But there are also the other ones where, like you said, there, and like they were saying on the Book Cougars, when you get into the mind of somebody who was intellectually engaged with a book and taking some really thoughtful notes, like sometimes it can add a lot of value or at least interest. So I do like that. um, I will say there's a lot of people who are in your camp of taking photos, which is something I've done before. We've joked about, yeah, I have a few pictures of my kids on my phone, but mostly it's just pages and pages of books, and that's definitely something that I do. But like Bart Van Overmeyer and Mark Lewandowski both mentioned, I take pictures of passages in my phone, don't write in my books, but they talk about how then you can add the photos to specific folders on your phone and sort them that way. So there's definitely that side of things too, where people, I think it, when I was reading through some of the essays that have been written about marginalia, a lot of them came about right when e-readers were coming on the scene, and they were talking about how electronic reading, like they were speculating at that time how it might impact marginalia, because Kindle and some of these others have some really cool tools where you can highlight and add notes and see what other people have done. So it's interesting. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on if you think you know the digital experience, whether it's some of the apps where you can keep track of your books and write
Hmm.
notes, or whether it's even on an e-reader or something like that, or taking pictures in your phone and sorting them into folders. Like, I think utility wise it makes a lot of sense, and it's very probably more organized in a lot of ways, and I do it. But I also sometimes I kind of like the messiness of
Hmm.
not necessarily having it all laid out. And as you're flipping through a book, you're like, oh, I forgot I underlined that or something like that.
Yeah.
So I do think that's an interesting evolution in all this too.
So I, for me, utility wise, it doesn't work. I'm not
Mm,
that well organized. If I take pictures on my phone, I have to get them off of it pretty soon, or it
okay.
becomes just a quagmire. I don't put them in folders. I don't do that. It's not something I enjoy doing, I guess, is maybe a way to put it. Like, it's not that I think it's wrong or that I don't think it would work. It's that I don't do it because I don't like it as much as I like sitting down afterwards and pulling out the pens and the
Right.
ruler. That I enjoy that process. I don't enjoy organizing the pictures on my phone, so I get rid of them. I have like just a handful of pictures on my phone, even though I take pictures every day and take pictures of the books I'm reading and the passages. And there are times when I get behind. In fact, I was looking through my phone to clean it off maybe a few months ago, and there are these different passages from Devil House and
Mm,
some books that I'd taken to Mexico last year, and I'm like, I need to get into those books and mark these passages and get these off of my phone and get back to manageable size. And I've been keeping up on it ever since.
yeah.
So I can't do it that way. And it also tends to get lost because then it's just a digital thing out there. I'd rather have it with the book. I'd rather have
That's
my thoughts with the book connected. Um, for me, again, this is not,
no,
I don't
yeah.
think either one of us cares how other people feel they best get and use their books.
No, and I'm intrigued honestly by, sometimes I'm kind of like temporarily won over when somebody starts describing their process. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But
Yeah,
but
you want
in
to go
practice for me,
further.
yeah, it just often doesn't work. I mean, um, Kevin hates writing with an 8 on Twitter says, I read everything in Libby. It lets you highlight text and add notes to highlights. You can then download all your highlights and notes as an Excel or CSV file. I keep a spreadsheet list of all the books I read, and part of each entry is a link to a spreadsheet of that book's notes. And I'm like, wow, that sounds amazing. Like, I can really see the value of that. But I know for me, I would start doing that and I would do it for a book or two, and then
Right.
it wouldn't happen. And so I just, it's fascinating to see the different ways that people
I I don't
do
even
things.
think that. Let me know here. I'm curious. I don't even think you have found a way that you like to log what you have read on
No,
any kind
it's
of digital
chaos. It's
device or
chaos.
something.
No, you've sent me wonderful spreadsheets, and I have, like, I used one all last year, but it was like, oh geez, I haven't updated that in like a month. And so instead of, I
Mhm.
started it on February 2nd and I finished it on February 9th, it would be like, February. I read it in February, and like,
Yeah.
so, and then there's another app that I know that you sent me, and I
Yeah,
have, again,
Storygraph is what it
Storygraph.
is.
It's amazing, and I used it faithfully for like 3 weeks, and then, not from lack of interest or value, like I think sometimes once you lose your momentum, then it's like you kind of get overwhelmed at the thought of going back in and having to add like 10 books. So
Yeah, and
yeah,
see, for me, when I finish a book, one of the things that I enjoy doing is going on there. I don't put the date that I started. I don't care about that. I don't care how long it
yeah.
took me. But I like to put, I finished this book. I like to click on the date that I finished it. That's something that I enjoy. It's not something
Hmm.
I do because I think it's right. It's not something I do because of any other impulse. Then I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I like looking back at a year and seeing when and where I was when I was finishing up books, and that's a way that I do it. But even beyond that, I just enjoy that moment. And I don't think it's to check off a book as done.
No.
I think it's to be excited about it and about the next one. It's really fun. And
No,
so
I
for me
agree.
it works, but I get that for others, not every, like, Goodreads doesn't work for me. I've tried to be faithful on Goodreads and mark what I've read. I don't like the experience. It's
Hmm.
not fun. It
Yeah.
doesn't add to my reading experience. Other parts of Goodreads do, but tracking what I read and all that, no. But the story graph just works for me. I don't know. It's
Hmm.
simple for me, and it just it gives me that sense of it gives me a smile, But
Yeah.
if it doesn't, then why do it?
Well, and what I will say is, I mean, you and I, we've talked about Palimpsest, which was the online forum we met on,
Uh huh.
and they used to do something called Palimp lists, where, as you finish books, you would just, on the forum, you would keep track of the books you'd read throughout the year. And I have all of those, and I will say, every year that I do eventually end up in some form. It's not very organized, but I do always end up with a list of everything I've read, because I think it's amazing to look back on the years and decades and, oh geez, I never would have guessed I read those two in the same year, or whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. So I do think there's a lot of value. It's just, like so much of, I guess, my reading life, it's I guess the main thing is it's about the books, and the rest of it, will vary and change over time, which is
Yeah.
fine with me. But
Yeah.
yeah, we also got a really funny one from Michael Martin. I don't know if you saw this one on Twitter, but we were asking about how people do it, and his just says highlighter, and it has a book with a highlighter that is duct taped to the cover. And I'm like, I
Right.
like that. Utilitarian and effective. So
But I think you hit it on the head for all of it. And I think Chris Via is a great way to start this. What makes my own reading experience, my own relationship with reading and books, the best for me?
mhm,
You know, I do love books as objects. I really do. I love looking at them. I like buying them. I like I like holding them. I like putting them back on the shelf. I like organizing books that I've never read and might never read. That to me is its own great experiences. I love reading books. What are the various things that I do that just give me that kind of joy and pleasure? And not all of us are going to be the same on that, and it's
right.
okay. It's why articles like the one in the Guardian a little bit ago
Hmm.
on someone basically saying like book ownership is you know middle class aspirational, and
Right.
both of us had a kind of an ugly response to that, because it seemed like it was saying this is the right way, and to do it a different way means you just haven't seen the light. And
Right.
Simon Thomas, it just the great way that he says there are different joys in reading books and in buying books.
Hmm.
And it's true, and it's fine. People, you got to be able to let people do what they feel is really adding to their life. If it isn't, if it's becoming a problem, I get that hoarding books and never doing anything with them might not be something that actually is giving people happiness. But and maybe you need to be someone who gets away from that, because it will give you a sense of clarity. I'll admit, we'll get into this maybe when we do a culling episode, but being able to cull some books does give me a little bit of peace of mind, so that I can see what I have and get excited about it again,
Hmm.
rather than just this overwhelming state that you can sometimes be in when there's too much sitting on the nightstand.
Yeah.
Um, but what the goal has always been: how do I make this work for
Right.
me the way that
And
I want it to?
what I've talked about in my own experience, it sounds like you too, and definitely a lot of the comments that we've received from different people is this is not a static thing. Our relationship with books, our relationship with how we interact with books, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
we change. I mean, it makes sense because if you get in a reading rut, you change genres or you go for something completely different, and that sometimes is what breaks you out of it. It's the same type of thing with the way you interact with your books. Sometimes people like me may have always been of the pristine school, and then all of a sudden they realize they want to try this and start engaging differently. Or on the flip side, as other people have said on here, they always used to mark in their books, but now they're getting older and they don't know if the people who inherit their library someday are going to want all these marks, so they've started to do it a different way. And it's just,
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense. I mean, just like any other part of our life, over time, the way that you feel at a certain time is not going to necessarily extend down through the years. So it's all part of
Right.
this big messy love we have, I guess.
And it's fun to sit and chat about it.
I know.
Um, in your looks for essays or things about marginalia, did you by any chance come across Billy Collins' poem "Marginalia"?
I did not.
It's almost it's almost that time of year to start talking Billy Collins again. It's
Yeah,
almost
absolutely.
it's getting closer to April and spring, which is when I really love to read poetry for some reason. Reading
Yeah.
seasons. But yeah, he's got it's a pretty long poem, so I won't read the whole thing, but I do like parts of it that you kind of mentioned. Oh yeah, here I had not read this before we talked this earlier, but it says students are more modest, needing to leave only their splayed footprints along the shore of the page. One scrawls metaphor next to a stanza of Eliot's. Another notes the presence of irony 50 times outside the paragraphs of a modest proposal. And then he just has different ways that we respond. Some people being, arguing with the author, others being like fans, like absolutely, things like that. Um, let's see here. And if you've ever managed to graduate from college without ever having written Man versus Nature in a margin, perhaps now is the time to take one step forward.
How did he get my
But
books?
that's right. But I like how he kind of ends it. It says, yet the one I think of most often, the one that dangles from me like a locket, was written in the copy of Catcher in the Rye I borrowed from the local library one slow, hot summer. I was just beginning high school then, reading books on a Davenport in my parents' living room, and I cannot tell you how vastly my loneliness was deepened, how poignant and amplified the world before me seemed, when I found on one page a few greasy looking smears, and next to them, written in soft pencil, by a beautiful girl, I could tell, whom I would never meet. Pardon the egg salad stains, but I'm in love.
Oh, wow.
That's how he ends his little thing on marginalia.
That's
And
beautiful.
maybe a good way of looking at this is, uh, if you're someone who likes marking in books, it goes back to what they said on Book Cougars. These are things lived in. They can be markers of a life and of thoughts and development, and they can be embarrassing,
Hmm.
but they can also be vulnerabilities and um, see these phases. And if you can get engaged with that as being something kind of beautiful,
Yeah.
then maybe this isn't such a bad thing to be engaged in. You know.
No, I agree. There was at the very end of this New Yorker piece on marginalia that just ties into this. I was going to skip it, but since you said that, I think it ties in perfectly. It says, there's something attractive about the contrast between the impersonal authority of the printed page and the idiosyncrasies of the reader's handwriting. A book someone has written in is an oddly intimate object. Like an item of clothing once worn by a person now passed away, it retains something of its former owner's presence. And I think that's beautiful.
Hmm.
That egg salad mark is exactly that. It's just there's something that's very intimate and vulnerable, and it also connects you with people that you may never meet. And it is one of the most beautiful things about it.
Yeah. Well, this feels like a good place to stop. Anything I say now will probably be just dumb or reiterating things that have already been said, and no need for
Yeah,
that.
no.
But enjoyed our conversation. We'll have to kind of say how this goes for us. Maybe
Hmm.
sharing some of our favorite marked up books that we own, whether from
Yeah,
our own markings or someone else's. Which ones
absolutely.
have been, which ones have given you like you look back on it and you're glad you did? And which ones do you look back on and say, I marked that, but I have no memory of it. It didn't work.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for chiming in. I've had so much fun over the last week or so reading through all the tweets and other ways that people have been reaching out and sharing their thoughts. And I would encourage anybody, we tried to highlight a few of them here, but there's so many. Anybody who wants to could go back and dig through those threads. I had posted something a few weeks ago, and you could find that tweet and kind of just scroll down. There's probably hours of good reading there and all kinds of interesting things. So I'd encourage people to join the conversation and let us know what you do or weigh in on that conversation, because that's one of the fun things about this community is just so many fascinating people out there who are engaged with their books and having a lot of fun. So
yeah, it makes me excited always. And looking back over the last couple of years, as we've been doing this, just really glad that we are, because it's, again, why am I doing this? It's fun. It increases my enjoyment of reading. It increases my excitement to read and to engage with people about books and thoughts and experiences, and just, I don't know, makes things a little bit better for me. So exactly. I love it.
I do too. So much fun.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. We will be back in a couple of weeks with a new episode. I think by the time this comes out, we may have finalized a little bit of our schedule. So check out the newsletter and you can see what we've got coming up. But as we record this, I can't remember. So we'll have to look there or just wait for the next episode to come out. But thanks everyone again. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mooks and the Gripes podcast. You can follow the Mooks and the Gripes and get show notes and book and film reviews at mooksandgripes.com. On Twitter, you can find Trevor at Mooks and Paul at BiblioPaul. You can also get information about future shows on our Patreon. If you'd like to donate to the show, anything and everything, even $1 a month, helps and is deeply appreciated. You can become a patron at patreon.com/mooks. Until next time.